So I have a few things to talk about before we continue with the material. One is there's just 2 weeks of lectures left in this class. Wednesday of next week there is no lecture. Instead there are discussion sections because UMass has decided that there should be a Monday overlapping a Wednesday next week. Okay? So we won't see each other again until next Friday, a week from today. Today you will find a homework assignment on the web page. That is the last homework assignment for this class, assignment number 9. Yeah, thank God, eh? We're almost out of this mess. It's due a week from today, so next Friday. Now we're sort of a little bit off the regular homework going out and coming back schedule. So I need to say a few things about how it's going to work. So today's homework, if for some reason you you have not handed it in and you want to hand it in late, you must hand it in Wednesday in discussion section. Okay? There's no lecture Wednesday, so it should come in Wednesday discussion section. Okay? The next homework assignment, as I said, is due Friday of next week, 1 week from today. That homework assignment, should you want to hand it in late, you will need to hand it in discussion section on the Monday that follows. Okay? Not the next lecture, but the next class. Monday, discussion section. All right? I'll post the answer keys for both of these assignments on the day, the day that they're on those days. Okay. All right? Any questions about this, ma'am? I will have office hours this Wednesday. So, though UMass says it's a Monday, I don't obey. Okay? So I'll be in my office 9 to 11 on Wednesday. All right? Anything else about this? These last 2 homework assignments. We've graded the midterms, the second midterm. So those will be available. Those will be available for you in discussion section next week on Wednesday. In general, you did well. There were 39 possible points, and the average score was around 32. So that's about the 82nd percentile. Yeah, it's damn good. Okay, it's damn good. So you did well. The one thing I noticed was that many people made mistakes on morphology. Okay? Some of you are excellent phonologists. Some of you are terrific syntacticians. Some of you are both of those things. But hoi, are you lousy morphologists. Okay? So work on the morphology. That's the thing I would say you need to work on for the final. Okay? This might be a good time for me to just take a moment and tell you about how your final grade will be calculated. The syllabus weights things. So, the weightings are, it's not exact, but they're roughly, the assignments altogether contribute about 1/3 of your final grade. The 2 midterms together deliver slightly less than 1/3 of your final grade. And the final, by itself, is worth about 1/3 of your grade. Okay? So if you've been doing well in this class, you can still screw up. Okay? And if you've been doing lousy in this class, there is still hope for you. The final is a big weight. Okay? If you are relying on the final to raise you out of F-dom, you and I should become friends very fast. So come and see me. I will do whatever I can to get you ready for the final. Okay? The way I calculate, so there's different ways of sort of fixing a letter grade to a numerical score that are used in the university. One of those ways is to just if you've managed to get 90% or more of the possible points, you get an A. If you get 80% or more, but less than 90% of the possible points, you get a B, and so on. That's one way grades can be calculated. The good thing about that scale is that if everyone does really well, everyone can get an A. The bad thing about this scale is that if everyone does really poorly, because the teacher's crap, everyone fails. So the other scale that's used is to look at what the average points are that students have gathered, and then to measure from that average what the average variation is, and then to assign points around that so-called curve. So if you score like the average person does, you would get a C+, a B-. If you do a little bit more than that, you would get a B. If you do significantly better than the average, you would get an A. Okay? That's the other measure used. The good thing about this scale is that if I've screwed up and all of you are doing badly, not all of you will fail, right? The bad thing is, if I've not screwed up and all of you are doing well, some of you who do well will still not get A's. Okay. Which should I use?
One where I get an First.
Straight scale? Do you like that? The way I usually resolve this is we divide the room into two and we fight it out. No weapons, just fists, and whoever's left standing decides. Who likes the straight scale? Please raise your hand. Who likes the curve? Please raise your hand. Don't be shy. The curve is good for you if you're not doing great. Okay. Can I see the hands again? Straight scale? Curve. Okay. Here's what I will do. I will take everybody's score. I will look at what grade that delivers them from the straight scale. I will then look to see what grade it delivers them from the curve. And I will choose the highest of those two. Are we agreed? Is this okay? Excellent. Yep. All right. Our practice parse for today is a cleft sentence, a sentence that is created by way of that rule we've recently learned that moves things around. It involves, like so many of my sentences do, elves, actually just the one, but due to a popular uprising in the audience, I've decided to reverse my attitude towards them to something equally unpalatable but less violent. Okay? So our sentence is, it's an elf that I kissed and hugged. Now this sentence, because it's created by the cleft rule, means that something has moved. This is the thing that's moved. To figure out how this sentence works then involves figuring out where it moved from, restoring it to that position, parsing that thing, and then we will have a picture of the so-called D structure for this sentence. The sentence that the cleft rule applied to give us this. This is the thing that moved. It moved from somewhere inside the complementizer phrase that follows. Where did it move from? The end. Is that the end of the sentence? Okay, over here. Great. Okay. You see how this step was done then? I know what moved because in clefts, it's the thing between is and that which is moved. And all I have to do now is figure out, well, where did it move from? Like, what am I understanding an elf to be here? The elf is the object of kissed and hugged. Yeah. Where is there a hole in the sentence that follows? Where is there a spot where an NP could be but isn't? Well, here, right after this verb. So let's parse this. What's this? 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 Yes. This? Kissed? And is something. Hugged? An elf. Now what should I do? Next. Oh, I should just pick on someone. Is anyone brave here today? Is anyone particularly frightened? You look brave. You did, anyway, a little while ago. Yeah. So what should I do? Tell me.
Of course, I would say to it, the end bar, so the noun phrase.
All right.
Then, you can take that, you jump to the end of the sentence with oh no, and take the theme and be the verb phrase.
This here, okay. What's following and? So we know, because this is the way and always works, it grabs something over here, it grabs something over here of the same sort, brings them together to make something, again, of the same kind. So if you put a verb phrase here, then there has to be a verb phrase over here that this joins. What is that verb phrase?
Don't I need to do something with that complement?
You do. Yes. So complementizers combine with sentences.
Okay, so then make the verb a verb phrase.
All right.
And then use and to combine the two verb phrases.
Yeah. Good man.
And then make the end bar.
Okay.
We're not done with it.
We are not done. I see your hand. I'll come to you in a moment. Okay? So I'm just, so your hand can rest. Yeah. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, look. There's one up there. Good. Possible parse. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about that. For the formation of the verb phrases for kissed and hugged and elf, instead of connecting hugged and elf first, could you connect kissed and hugged? You make kissed a verb phrase, hugged a verb phrase, connect them, and then add?
Okay, so the question is...
Could you do that? I'm just not...
Yeah. So instead of this verb phrase, could we do this? I'll draw the alternative over here, okay? So here's the question. Could we make the verb phrase something that doesn't include an elf, right? So, like, this would be here. Here's what you suggested. Can everyone see this? It's kind of far over. Are we okay? This guy's named Kyle down here. Isn't that freaky? Doesn't it just freak you out? Too many Kyles. Okay, and then these things should be verb phrases, I guessed. So is this what you had in mind?
Yes.
This actually isn't possible. Can you tell me why? I mean, of course, that's a stupid question, because, if you could, you...
Yeah. No, the answer is no. I can't tell you why.
Can you?
Well, the verb phrase and the noun phrase, but you could make the...
Wait. So the problem is that a noun phrase doesn't combine with a verb phrase.
Oh, it just combines with a verb.
Verb, right? But
Can't you just connect the and to the verb, not one verb?
so you could do something like what you're suggesting, but just decide that these are verbs.
Okay.
Okay? Then it's possible.
How does that change the meaning?
Well, if I say, I kissed and hugged an elf, what am I doing?
You're,
Okay. That was kissing. Clint? No. No. Clint today is our elf. The women have asked me never to do this to them again. But Clint has been... Floor. Okay. Wow, it's amazing. I thought violence was the winner, but apparently this is the love generation. Okay, so notice that I didn't kiss Clint. Yeah. Might have noticed that. He did. Okay? That's what that means. This means something different. I asked you to shave.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I noticed it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what this means. Okay. Okay? So there's actually two possible D structures here. Right? I mean, at least if we put an elf back here, there's two different ways we could organize these words and have an elf in them. Mm-hmm. Sir?
How do you qualify its? Do you take off you split it into it?
Yeah. So it is, sometimes these two, they say they get contracted. So sometimes what happens is the phonology looks at this and it decides, oh, be lazy, oh, tongue, and just, makes this part of this guy's coda. But really, this is what its is. It is.
Well, I know what its means, but
How do I do it?
Yeah.
It really is just the phonology is able to look at these two words, and there's a rule that makes this the coda of this.
So you put
It isn't in the syntax even.
S.
It's like this whole sentence goes to the phonology. And there's a rule I haven't taught you in the phonology that says when it and is are next to each other, you can pronounce them as its. Something like that. Ma'am?
I think the question is,
Oh, thank
in
you.
the homework, should we treat it as one word and put the B over just the S, or should we split it up?
Is that the... Yeah. It's just a phonological rule that's how my teachers always answered split it back up. Yeah, that would be the best thing to do. Mm-hmm. Marvelous. Okay, so actually, we've got two different candidates then here for this verb phrase. And now let's apply the Cleft rule, right? But when we do this, let's keep in mind that this might be the D structure, or this might be the D structure. Okay? So what will the Cleft rule do? Well, the Cleft rule does this. It looks at a sentence that has this form. It goes to this CP. It finds something, some phrase inside the CP, and it yanks that guy out of the CP and puts it up here. In this case, what's being yanked out is this noun phrase, an elf. Okay? The rule will take that noun phrase, an elf. It will move it out of this complementizer phrase. And it will, and here's the mysterious and weird magic that is the Cleft rule, it will build a whole new phrase here. In place of the CP, there will be a new phrase that has that CP in it and also has in it the thing that's being moved. Mm-hmm. This phrase will be the same kind as the phrase that's being moved. So here it's a noun phrase because it's a noun phrase that's being moved. Okay. All right? So either this rule would take this thing and move it up there if this is the D structure, or if this is the D structure, it would take this thing and move it up here. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I don't have my, the
Rules. Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, it wasn't a noun phrase that could have the CP in it. It was like a CP and an N bar combined to become an N bar.
So if you look at the phrase structure rules, this is not possible. This is not possible. The phrase structure rules say, among other things, a noun phrase can't be a sister to a verb phrase. Only to sister, the thing that it's next to. Very feminine. Right? This isn't possible. And like you just said, if a noun phrase has a complementizer phrase in it, our phrase structure rules say that happens like this. This is created by the Cleft rule, not by the phrase structure rules. So the Cleft rule is building something that the phrase structure rules wouldn't allow. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why this looks odd. Ma'am.
So if you took elf, just elf, which is the N bar,
Yeah.
that the complementizer, if you connect that to the complementizer phrase,
These two?
yes, that makes the phrase. So would that make an N bar, or
No. Yeah, this is the...
you would follow that and add it to it? So like what I'm saying is that if you took the elf N bar, the complementizer phrase, and then added the determiner to make the noun phrase, that would be correct.
That's not what this rule does. Yeah. The truth is, if I were to tell you why I think it's this way and not your way, I'd have a hard time showing you that. But trust me, this is right, that is wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As it turns out. Okay. Are we all right so far? Ma'am?
Why wouldn't you just put the noun phrase with, like, the verb phrase with is, and then put that
Because, so why, the question is, why doesn't it look like, well, this is what our phrase structure rules would do. They would say, here's an elf, and then here's the complementizer phrase. This verb phrase is something that our phrase structure rules would allow and which would more or less correspond to what's seen. So why aren't I doing it this way? The reason for that is because we want to capture somehow the fact that in this sentence, an elf is understood to be the object of hugged. Right? There's some sense in which this noun phrase, an elf, is both here where you speak it, but also down here in object position. That's why. It's trying to capture that fact. Okay? So now let me ask you. This sentence has two different D structures. It's an elf that I hugged and kissed. Those two different D structures give to this sentence two expected different meanings. One where I'm just hugging Clint, and one where I'm doing something much more.
Oh, that's it.
No, you. Please stay. We might need you later. If I say to you, it's an elf that I hugged and kissed, what meaning does it have? Did I hug and kiss the elf? Both? Or did I hug the elf and kiss? I hugged an elf to the kiss, didn't I? I'm all flustered. It only has this meaning. Do you see that? It doesn't mean this. It's an elf that I hugged and kissed means I hugged and kissed both some elf. It doesn't mean I hugged an elf and I kissed. Right? Do you see that? Are you with me? Why? Why is this D structure not a possible way of getting this sentence, but this D structure is? The reason is because there are constraints on the Clefts rule. Remember those? We looked at those last Friday. There are two constraints on the Cleft rule. What these constraints do is they tell you places where the Cleft rule cannot apply. And one of those constraints says, if the Cleft rule moves something out of a coordination, out of a phrase that's made with this rule that brings in and, the result is always ungrammatical. That's exactly what would have had to have happened here. If this was the D structure, for this to move up there would have required the Cleft rule to take this noun phrase, which is inside this phrase built with and move it somewhere outside that phrase. That's exactly what this constraint says you cannot do. So though this is a possible parse, it's not a possible parse that would allow the Cleft rule to form this sentence. It would violate that constraint. That constraint is called the coordinate structure constraint. By contrast, if this verb phrase looks like this noun phrase, which is being moved by the Cleft rule, does not start inside the thing that's built with and. It starts outside that coordination. And so moving this up there never moves this thing out of a phrase that's built with the rule that introduces and. There is no violation of the coordinate structure constraint. Are you with me on this? Okay. The homework assignment that I've posted on the website today gives you a set of sentences that involve the Cleft rule. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. The good ones and the bad ones differ by virtue of whether or not a constraint is preventing the rule from applying. Okay? So, thank you. What we just did now is sort of like a warm-up for that homework assignment. Okay? Are there any questions about this? So here's what we've done in this class so far. First we learned how to talk to each other about words. We did that by learning an alphabet that represents sound, the International Phonetic Alphabet. And with that alphabet, I taught you some things about how sounds are composed into morphemes and the rules that control how those sounds are actually pronounced. Phonotactic constraints, syllabification rule, allophones coming out of phonemes. And then we looked at how the morphemes that are constructed from these sounds are composed up into larger units, words. There we discovered that there's rules that guide how that happens, and there's generalizations that say how, in general, these rules are steered. Inflectional affixes are different than derivational ones, for instance. And then we started looking at the principles that control how words are combined to make sentences. And we've learned phrase structure rules. We've learned something about how the different way of organizing those words controls what these sentences mean. And now finally we've seen that there are rules that can screw with the phrase structure rules, moving things around, forming new sentences, like the Clefts rule does. Okay. Everything we've been doing up till now has been just sort of sketching what it is that's in your head that allows you to use, to control English or some other language that you speak. Where are we going?
I'm not technically in your class.
Oh,
Just
it's okay.
It was a nice class. So
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very nice seeing you. Why does that always happen to me? How did that get in your head, all that stuff? It's a lot, right? And, kind of mysteriously, it's this kind of stuff that allows you to use English and to speak English sentences and to understand them as they come in. It's a lot of stuff. Like, did you ever know that codas can't have things in them that differ in voicing unless one of them's sonorant? Were you aware of that? Did you know that voiceless stops come with a little puff of air when they're at the beginning of an onset? Did you know that? Did you know that smashing L's on tables with hats could mean so many different things? Somehow you know that, unconsciously, of course. And the question is, the question that we'll now look at, how? How did you learn that? The study of how this was acquired by speakers of languages is called language acquisition. And it's our next subject. It's what we'll look at last in this class. There's two main things we've been looking at so far. We've been looking at our syntactic knowledge, the knowledge about how words fit together to make sentences, and our phonological knowledge, our knowledge about how sounds go together to make words, morphemes and then words finally. And so what I thought I would do is show you a little bit about what we know concerning how you learned these rules of syntax and you learned these rules of phonology, like the phonotactic constraints and the allophone phoneme rule. We'll start with syntax. And I thought, like the first thing I would show you is just, think about how miraculous it is. So most of us managed to learn the rules I've taught you by the age of 5. The rules I taught you about phonology, most of us have learned by the age of 3. If you've ever spoken to a 3-year-old, you'll be stunned, because 3-year-olds are remarkably stupid. They cannot hold a conversation to save their lives. And yet they know a hell of a lot about what you're doing when you speak. How do they learn that? Up until you're about 2, you can barely raise your head. Yeah? So you're laying there like this, a bubbling mess of fluids. People are talking around you. And here's one thing they're not saying. If your onset has 3 sounds in it, the first should be sa, the second should be a voiceless stop, and the third, well, let me show you. Never happens. Actually, that's not true. Some linguists have done that to their children. There are 2 things that happen. Their children do not learn language any faster, and their children spend thousands of dollars in therapy later in life. So this is not how we learned this. We learned it, well, how? How exactly? Like, just to get a feel for how hard this is, consider the task that is before you as a 1-year-old, laying in your little crib, bubbling away. If you have to learn the phrase structure rules and like the syntactic rules such as the Cleft rule of English, suppose you're just concentrating on that job, you little 1-year-old. What do you have to do? What are you presented with? Well, Let's assume that you've already learned enough about how the sounds go into making up words that you can figure out what that chirping is that your mom and dad are doing around you. Okay? Let's suppose, for instance, that as you hear them chirp, you know how to segment that chirping into words and order those words. And now what you have to do is figure out, okay, what do the words mean, and how do they go together to make bigger meanings? Yeah, so, like, let's go back and be a 1-year-old. Okay? Sounds hard, doesn't it? Let's see how hard. Here's exactly what you'll do. Okay? So here's how it will go. Suppose I'm your father. And you hear me say, Doc Bull Dodd. Right? That's what's going to happen. You're going to hear something, you're going to see something happen that you correspond with that, and you're going to have to decode, what the hell? Okay? So here, let's do it. First thing, Doc Bull Dodd. Doc Al Dodd. I am not a very good father, just so everyone knows. Doc Bull Bloot. Ouch. Doc Doddy. Doc Blue Tea. Okay. Toe Doc Doddy Doc Blue Tea. Okay. Doc Toe Doddy Blue Tea. Doc Toe Bull Bloot Ale Dodd. And now it's nap time. That's all you get for today. So, can you figure out what's going on? What do you think? So, first let's figure out if we can get the meaning of the words right. What's dock mean? Arm? Raise?
To do?
Yeah, so a lot of docks here, right? So Doc Bull Dodd was this. Doc Ale Dodd was this. Doc Bull Bloot was this. So dock means probably it's the verb. Whatever this action is docking. Okay? Are we agreed? What's Dodd? Yeah. What's Bull? And Ale? What's Bloot? What's E? Yeah. Yeah. What's toe? Yeah. And or both or something like that, right? I decided I was spreading when I was doing that stuff. Okay? Not bad. So there are what the words mean. And, well, here are the phrase structure rules. So what's happening is the verb always comes first unless it's being coordinated with something. Right? And then the noun phrase comes second. And the noun phrases organize adjectives and nouns in a way that's very English-like. And to make a coordination, you put the word that means and before the two things, rather than between the two things that are being brought together. Could you have gotten those rules? Let's do one more. Okay, you ready? All right. This is what it's like for the little bugger. And he's growing like 5 inches an hour, so. Okay, here we go. Tulu tuk. Blood tuk shim. Blood took tool. Gal took shim. It's a much more dramatic language, this one. Gal took shim. Tun took ooh. Tun blood shin took. Tul took blood tun. Tun took gal tun tol. Tun took gal. This is why Hawaiian never made it for me. Tun tuk gal tol tun tun. What do you think? Have you got it? Want to hear it again? Okay, here we go. Tulu tuk. Blood tuk shim. Blood tuk tol. Kal tuk shim. Tun tuk shimu. I'm trying to sound like a samurai, it seems. Tun blood shim tuk. Tol tuk blood tun. Tun tuk kal tol tun tun. Got it? You know what? If we were to give this to a child and ask them to figure out what the words mean and how they're organized, they'd fail. Just like you're failing now. You know why? Because the grammar's crazy. The grammar says this: put the verb an even number of words from the beginning. Hola? Yep, that's the verb. It's here in second position, fourth position, second position, second position. These are all verbs plus noun phrases with adjectives in them. There's nothing else in these cases. How do the nouns and adjectives combine to make noun phrases? You count in from the left edge for the adjective, and you count the same number in from the right edge for the noun. These two go together. This grammar, ladies and gentlemen, is tremendously simple. But you would never be able to learn it. What's the difference between this grammar and this one? This looks like our rules, right? This doesn't. More particularly, what's the difference between these two grammars? Well, in Flotibak, the first language, we've got rules that say something of some kind can be right next to something else of some kind. A verb can be right next to a noun phrase. An adjective can be right next to a noun. Everything you need to know about Flotibak is what two things can be next to each other. But in the second language, Flutibak, what you have to do is count. You have to be able to say, okay, here's my sentence. I'll count in, I'll count right, and I'll match what I find. The material that's in this rule, building phrases, is material about where, numerically, something can stand.
Are there any real languages like that?
There are not. Now suppose you're a child. You have just come spitting out, okay? You are laying in your crib. You are hearing something that is a language. Suppose you did not know whether it was Flutibak or something like Flutibak. or Flottyback, or something like Flottyback. Suppose you didn't know, what could these rules look like? Suppose you were just laying there thinking, shit, do I have to count? Or do I just look at the things that are standing next to each other? If you had to make that decision, we can prove you would never learn the language. Impossible. Too hard a job. Because we never see Flutyback type languages and only Flottyback type languages, our guess is that there's something about children that allows them only to learn rules like Flottyback rules. Those are rules that say, oh, these two things can be next to each other, and that's all they ever say. Okay. But if that's true, why is it true? I mean, it doesn't actually follow from anything I've taught you. Sir?
An actual disturbance does what they decide to teach.
Children in possible languages? There was a fellow, I will even name him. His name is Derek Bickerton. He teaches at the University of Hawaii. He wrote a grant proposing that a small island in the archipelago that includes Hawaii be used to isolate children and allow them to see only grammars of not the Flutyback sort, but just as bad, to see what would happen. This grant was passed around the Senate for some time, where it got lots of laughs and rejected. So it appears that one of the things that our government can discern is that doing this to children is wrong. And so it's not yet been done. Until we elect the right people in, we will never know.